I made this video a couple weeks ago, and from there I've been asked a lot of questions on how to figure out how many FBitcoin, the Fidelity Bitcoin ETF, how many shares of FBitcoin equals one whole Bitcoin. Now every single Bitcoin ETF is a little bit different, and it makes it really kind of confusing to understand how many shares of these ETFs you need to kind of equal one Bitcoin or a half a Bitcoin or 0.1 Bitcoin. It's very, very hard to set a goal if you can't figure it out. So from that video I made and from me investing into the Bitcoin ETF myself, I've figured out two ways that you can go about figuring how many shares of an ETF equals a total Bitcoin. And this changes very, very often, especially with Bitcoin being open market 24/7 and the ETFs being closed market on the weekends or at the end of the day. So we're going to show you two ways that you can calculate how many shares of an ETF, specifically the Fidelity Bitcoin ETF, equals one Bitcoin. So you can understand how much Bitcoin you're stacking, or like you can set some goals for yourself to kind of accumulate towards. The first way, and actually the easiest way that you can calculate how many Fidelity Bitcoin shares that you need to hold in order to equal one Bitcoin, is you want to take the price of one Bitcoin and divide it by the price of one FBitcoin share. You can do this with any Bitcoin ETF, but I put it on a little piece of paper right here for you. You want to take the price of one Bitcoin and divide it by the price of the Bitcoin ETF share. So here's our example. 68,000 is today's Bitcoin price. $60 is today's Fidelity Bitcoin price. You're going to divide 68,000 by 60, the price of Bitcoin today, divided by the price of Fidelity Bitcoin, one share each today. You're going to get 1,135 shares of FBitcoin equals one whole Bitcoin. You can do the same thing with any Bitcoin ETF. It's actually probably the simplest way to do it, but you want to take that Bitcoin price of today, divide it by the price of the Bitcoin ETF you want to invest in, one share each. So one Bitcoin divided by one share of FBitcoin, or one iBitcoin, or one ARC Bitcoin, right? Whatever those ticker symbols are, just divide it. It'll give you a number of shares, typically probably going to be around like the 1,000 mark, but a number of shares you need to hold in order to reach that one Bitcoin. From there, if you want to decide what a half a Bitcoin is or a quarter Bitcoin, you can simply divide that total number of shares by half to get a half a Bitcoin, or by a quarter to get a quarter Bitcoin. You can do the math and it'll tell you how much you need to stack, essentially. The second way that you can go about understanding how much FBitcoin, or how many shares of a Bitcoin ETF that you need to hold in order to have X amount of Bitcoin, is to look at the daily reports. Now, on each specific broker's website, they're going to have what's called a prospectus and like a daily holding report. They're kind of tricky to find, but after a little bit of working and figure out where they are. For Fidelity's, it's on their website next to the prospectus area. It's not in the prospectus. That's like a huge 100-page document about the fund. But next to that, or around that, there's going to be a daily holding report. In that daily holding report, you can see the total number of outstanding shares for the ETF. And after you know the total number of shares and the total number of Bitcoin held by the ETF, you can divide the total number of shares divided by the total number of Bitcoin. And that would give you how many shares you need to hold to equal one Bitcoin. If you want to go find the prospectus and daily holding report of your specific Bitcoin ETF, you can go look at this data as well. The formula, I've got it right here on this piece of paper. The formula is going to be the number of shares outstanding divided by the number of Bitcoin held by the fund. So up here in Fidelity's scenario, you can see we got 140,600,000 shares, 600,000 shares, and then they're holding, like, what does that say, 122,000 Bitcoin. So that equals 1,143 shares of FBitcoin if you want to have one Bitcoin equivalent worth of value. So in our other calculation, we got 1,135. This calculation got 1,143. So somewhere between 1,135 FBitcoin and 1,143 FBitcoin will get you the equivalent of one Bitcoin share in Fidelity Bitcoin ETF. That's pretty much how you calculate how many shares of a Bitcoin ETF you need in order to equal one Bitcoin or a half a Bitcoin, whatever your number is. Or if you just want to figure out how much Bitcoin do I hold, those are the two ways you can do it and get kind of close and figure out where you are on average between those two numbers. The first way is the easiest way and my favorite way to do it. It takes like 5 minutes. You can figure out how much you're holding of any ETF, and it's really super simple. Now, it can be confusing between the ETFs because the way that they price things and how many shares they have allocated can get confusing. So these two methods kind of eliminate some of that and let you just kind of look at the numbers and do the math and calculate accordingly. If you liked the video, we appreciate your support. Down in the description, we're going to have some of these t-shirts. Feel free to check it out, or like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.